The grain was gone. The rain had failed. But then Abba sang her first note, and the empty bowls began to fill.
There's a girl who fed an entire village, not with magic, not with gold, not with a miracle from the sky, but with a song, a shovel, and a stubborn kind of joy that would not quit. This is the story of Abba, the girl who turned the hungriest season her village had ever known into its happiest one. In the village of Adom, where the hills rolled green and the river sang all year long, there lived a girl named Abba. She was 8 years old, missing one front tooth, and completely unbothered by that fact. Abba was known for exactly one thing in Adom. She talked to her garden like it was family. Every morning, before the goats were even awake, Abba crouched beside her little garden patch behind her grandmother's hut. "Good morning, my friends," she'd whisper to the yams. "Sleep well? Today we grow a little taller, okay?" The other children thought this was the silliest thing they'd ever heard. "You're talking to yams again?" laughed Kwame, the miller's son from the path. "Next you'll be inviting them to your birthday party." His friends laughed too. Abba just shrugged, patted the soil, and kept humming her little tune. She didn't mind. Her garden never laughed at her. Abba lived with her grandmother, Nana Ajoa, the oldest woman in Adom and the only one who never teased her. "Your great-great-great-grandmother talked to her garden too," Nana Ajoa said one evening, stirring the cooking pot. "And her garden fed 3 villages during the hungriest year anyone remembers." "Talking isn't the real secret," Nana Ajoa whispered with a wink. "It's the song underneath it." And right there under the stars, she taught Abba an old planting song, one passed down through 5 generations of women in their family, a song for calling things to grow. From that night on, Abba sang while she watered. She sang while she weeded. She sang while she talked to her yams, her beans, her stubborn little pumpkin vine. And somehow, rain or shine, her little garden patch stayed the greenest, fullest little garden in all of Adom. Now, Adom's other farms did fine most years, corn here, cassava there, beans along the riverbank, but that particular season, the rains had come late and light. Farmers scratched their heads at the sky and mumbled about the clouds owing them a favor. One afternoon, Kwame, the same boy who teased her, wandered past Abba's fence and stopped cold. While his family's corn stood pale and thirsty, Abba's little patch was bursting green, heavy with beans and fat orange pumpkins. "How?" he started. "How is this even possible?" Abba just smiled her gap-toothed smile. "I talk to them, I sing to them, and I never forget to say thank you." Kwame squinted, waiting for the joke, but there wasn't one. Abba wasn't laughing. She meant every word. Kwame didn't tease her that day. In fact, he asked if he could come back tomorrow. Abba said yes, and though neither of them knew it yet, that small moment at the fence was the very first seed of something much bigger than either of them could imagine. But the clouds kept their favor to themselves. Weeks passed, then a month. The river that sang all year began to whisper instead. The cornfields that once stood tall now bowed their heads like tired old men. Adom was facing something it hadn't seen in a generation, a true dry season. In the evenings, parents gathered outside their huts, voices low and heavy. "If the next harvest fails too," said Kwame's father, "we will have a hungry season ahead of us." Nobody wanted to say the word out loud, but everyone was thinking it. Abba, tucked behind her grandmother on the porch, heard every word. She looked out at the darkening fields, then down at her own small hands, the same hands that somehow kept her little garden green when nothing else in Adom would grow. That night, Abba couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about her garden bursting with more beans and pumpkins than she and Nana Ajoa could possibly eat alone. "Grandmother," she whispered in the dark, if our garden wasn't just my garden anymore? Nana Adjoa smiled in the darkness, as if she'd been waiting years for Abba to ask that exact question. A garden shared grows twice, once in the soil and once in the hearts of everyone who helped plant it. So Abba made a decision that would have seemed impossible to anyone but her. She wasn't going to hoard her harvest. She wasn't going to sell it for the highest price. She was going to give it away and turn every child who ever laughed at her into a farmer. The next morning, Abba stood in the village square and rang her grandmother's cooking bell. Clang, clang, clang! Children came running, expecting news of a festival or a lost goat. Instead, they found Abba standing on a stool, grinning her gap-toothed grin. I need diggers, I need waterers, weeders, singers, and seed carriers. Nobody is too small and nobody is too silly. If you can hum a tune and carry a gourd, you are hired. The children looked at each other, unsure whether to laugh or listen. It was Kwame who stepped forward first. I'll dig, he said. I dig faster than anyone in Adom. A few kids snickered. Kwame was famous for being the laziest boy in the village, but Abba just handed him a small wooden hoe and said, prove it then. One by one, more children stepped up. The blacksmith's twin daughters, the quiet boy who always sat under the mango tree, even little Efua, only 5 years old, who could barely lift a gourd but insisted on carrying one anyway. By sunset, Abba had her first small army of farmers, all under the age of 12. Nana Adjoa offered up the wide empty field behind her hut, unused since Abba's great-grandmother's time. The children spent their first morning clearing weeds and stones, Abba leading them in her grandmother's old planting song, her clear voice rising above the laughter and grunting. Repeat after me, Abba called, and 40 small voices repeated her grandmother's old words, words about rain that remembers, soil that listens, and roots that never forget who fed them. It sounded silly at first, then it sounded beautiful, then, somehow, it just sounded true. Word of the children's farm spread fast. Old Mama Efe, who hadn't left her porch in months, hobbled over with a pouch of saved bean seeds. These were my mother's, she said, pressing them into Abba's hands. Make them dance again. By the third day, it wasn't just children anymore. Mothers arrived with water gourds balanced on their heads. Fathers, done with their own dry fields by midday, wandered over just to check and somehow stayed to dig. The children's farm was quietly becoming everyone's farm. And Kwame, lazy, teasing Kwame, turned out to be the best digger in all of Adom, exactly as he had promised. His rows were the straightest, his holes were the deepest. For the first time in his life, people called him hard-working instead of lazy, and he wore the word like a crown. But it wasn't all easy. One scorching afternoon, the village well ran low, and the water gourds came back only half full. The children's shoulders slumped. Little Efua sat down in the dirt and nearly cried. What if we don't have enough water, and it's all for nothing? She sniffled. Abba crouched down beside her. You know what my grandmother always says? A little water shared by many hands waters more than a lot of water carried by one tired person. She scooped a small cup from her own gourd and poured it gently on Efua's row. See? Still enough, always enough when we share it. That evening, Abba asked the older boys who fished the river for fun if they'd help carry water instead. They agreed and turned it into a game, racing each other up from the riverbank with gourds balanced on their heads, spilling more from laughing than from actual running. Within 2 weeks, the children's farm had tripled in size. Rows of beans stretched where dry weeds once stood. Little green pumpkin vines curled along the fence Abba's grandmother had built decades ago. And every single evening, the planting song rang out over Adom like a second sunset. Nana Adjoa sat on her porch every evening, watching the field that had sat empty since her own mother's time come back to life, not through her hands this time, but through her grandmother's. She didn't say much. She just smiled the smile of someone who'd been right all along. Eventually, news of the children's farm reached the village chief himself. He walked out to see it with his own eyes. Rows of beans, healthy pumpkins, children singing as they worked, and stood there for a long moment, simply astonished. "Whose idea was this?" the chief asked. 40 small fingers pointed straight at Abba, who suddenly looked very shy for a girl who had rung a bell and organized an entire farm. The chief knelt down to her height and said simply, "Adom will remember this season because of you." Weeks turned into a month, and the children's farm began to ripen. Beans hung heavy on their vines. Pumpkins grew round and orange as the sun set. Even the sky seemed to notice, finally sending down a few generous showers just as the crops needed them most. As harvest day neared, the whole village buzzed with excitement. Mothers prepared cooking pots. Fathers built long wooden tables under the mango trees. Even the goats seemed to sense something good was coming, judging by how much noise they made. On harvest morning, Abba awoke before the rooster, just like always. But this time, when she walked to the field, she wasn't alone.
40 children were already there, waiting for her, hoes and baskets in hand, ready to bring in what they'd grown together. They sang the planting song one final time, now turned into a harvest song, as basket after basket filled with beans, pumpkins, and plump ears of corn. It took the whole village working together to carry it all home. Nobody's arms were empty. Nobody left with less than they came with. By afternoon, the long wooden tables groaned under the weight of food. Bean stew, roasted pumpkin, corn fresh off the cob, and Nana Ajoa's famous stew, made from the very first vegetables Abba ever grew. Lanterns were strung between the mango trees, like tiny captured stars. As the sun began to set, every single person in Adom gathered. Farmers whose own harvest had failed, elders who remembered leaner years, children with dirt still under their fingernails from the morning's work. Nobody was hungry that night, not one single person. Little Afua, the girl who once cried over a half-empty gourd, stood proudly beside a pumpkin nearly as big as she was. "I grew this one," she announced to anyone who would listen, and several people who weren't listening at all, twice. Kwame stood on a bench, holding up a corn cob like it was a trophy. "To the best digger in Adom," he announced grandly, which is me, in case that wasn't clear. The whole village laughed, the good kind of laughing, the kind Abba never once got tired of hearing. The chief rose and raised his cup. This season, Adom was tested, he said, and Adom was fed, not by rain, not by luck, but by a girl who believed her small garden could become everyone's garden. Let it be known, this was the season of Abba. Abba, sitting between her grandmother and Kwame, turned a shade of red visible even in lantern light. "It wasn't just me," she mumbled. "It was everyone." Nana Ajua squeezed her hand under the table. "That," she whispered, "is exactly why it worked." Someone started humming the old planting song. Then someone else joined. Then, without anyone quite deciding to, the entire village was singing it together. The same words Nana Ajua once taught only to Abba, now sung by farmers, children, elders, and one very proud digger named Kwame. Late into the night, when the little ones had fallen asleep against their mother's shoulders and the songs had softened to hums, Abba lay back on the grass and looked up at the stars. Her garden had grown bigger than she ever imagined, not just in the ground, but in her whole village. Nana Ajua sat beside her, humming the last notes of the old song. "You know," she said softly, "the song was never really about the crops. It was about remembering that no garden and no person is meant to grow all alone. The elders of Adom still say it even now. One seed feeds one mouth, but one shared seed feeds a whole village." Abba never became a great warrior or a powerful chief. She simply remembered to share what she had, and to make the sharing feel like joy instead of duty. And in Adom, that turned out to be the most powerful magic of all. If this story warmed your heart, if it reminded you of someone who shares without being asked, leave a comment below with just one word, their name. Let's fill this comment section with the sharers, the givers, the ones who turn small things into big things. And if you're new here, subscribe. Every week, we retell the stories that deserve to be remembered. See you next time.